Hi everyone, this is part 2 of our webinar, Organizing Data in DataGraph. In this video, we go through 5 different examples of spreadsheets that are not optimally organized, that come from this paper, Organizing Data in Spreadsheets, and we use DataGraph to manipulate the data to get it into a really good format. Click in the description of the video for a link to the paper, as well as a description of each one of the examples we're going to go through. So there's a lot of good stuff in here to show you how to quickly move data around and really learn how to get the most out of the program. The video starts off by tackling the examples that are in Figure 5 from the paper. So here it goes. So Figure 5 has 4 different panels. It has A, B, C, and D. And again, some of these are just really very quick for me in DataGraph to go ahead and make them in a format that would be recommended. So here we have our non-optimal version, where we have a category here on the left-hand side. We have male, female. We have these values that are some type of ID value that is repeated, but again, it's going in the wrong direction. We'll do Command A to select, Command C to copy. I'm going to now not show that part of the data. I'm going to do Shift Command V to paste, and I already have it set up to transpose, and it's transposing the data in the way that I would like. So I can go ahead and paste that in. Now I see I have these multiple columns. It's easy enough just to, highlight the columns that you don't need, delete those. This ID is shown a number of times. Here's my ID, and then I can just right click on this, use row for column titles, click on that row, delete it. Now, what you'll notice sometimes is when you try and delete a row, a pop-up will show you ask you a question to verify what are you actually wanting to delete. And whenever this pops up, just pay attention to the options that are there, because this is meant to prevent you from doing something that you don't want to do. So in this case, I have the option of deleting row 1 from all of the columns in my file. I don't want to do that. I only want to delete row 1 from the visible files. So I'll say only visible, and now I have my data in a much nicer format. And for example, if I wanted to make a graph of this glucose versus insulin, I could go ahead and click that data, click on my points command, and very quickly get a scatter graph showing these 2 variables against each other. Actually, I also could have done, just for those of you who haven't done this before, I could just click the space bar and you will get automatically a quick graph that shows you some information about the relationship between these 2 variables. There's some goodness of fit data. And I can even do that also just with a single column. So again, those of you who might not be familiar with that, that's a really handy way to get a histogram of a column of data, get some information about that column. That's just, in that viewer. Okay, so the next one that you see here is, in some ways it has some similarities. It's a file that has these headers going across, and there's 1 minute, there's 5 minutes, and we would want to separate this out into, again, to make this into the better format. So if I want to do this one again, actually a lot of these techniques are similar. I'm going to copy this. Let me show you, in fact, the format that we're going for. Here's the one that you see here. I can go ahead and edit and paste special. We've already picked transpose, so it knows that that's an option that we want to do. So I can paste this. And then again, I have this data that I'm now manipulating. Now, one of the things that you'll notice in that original format, let me just show that for a moment, is that what they were doing is they were blocking off, here's the data that's the normal data, here's the data that's the mutant type, and it's almost I guess actually what they were really doing initially in this data is using that option for filling cells. So you have a cell entry, but you have it go across multiple cells. That's one of the things that we definitely would recommend not doing, is not recommended. So as a result, the word normal ends up kind of in between the three columns that it refers to. So in DataGraph, you can do manipulation on this to be able to change the location of this data. So I don't have to manually move these up. I can actually go to where you would think of a cell, for example, and right click on that. And I'm going to say remove row 2. But again, there's options as to how do I remove it. Do I remove it only from this column, from my displayed columns, or do I remove it from all of the columns that are in my file? And again, I want to remove it only from this column. Now I have my location, the location of my labels is in the right place, so I can then select fill the empty rows, and I have it the way that I want it. So I can do the same thing here. I can right click. I'm going to remove row 2 only from this column. Then I'm going to fill empty rows with previous not empty rows, and I have my values that you see here. And I can do the same thing here with I still have this as a text column, so I can fill my rows. I can fill my rows here. I can take my column that you see here, and this is what I'm going to also use as my header, and we'll just call this type, and I'm going to put the type here. So the last action that I need to do here is to append these this data one side onto the other side. So if you look at this now, you can see how it's basically like two groups. And again, I hit the delete key. I want to say that I'm deleting this only from the visible columns. So I see my two groups that I want to, here would be the left-hand side. Here's one group, whoops. Here's one group. And then on the right-hand side, here's my other group that I want to append this group below the other group. That's actually very easy to do. I can take this and I can actually do Command X just to cut that from my data, and then I can click on the row where you want to paste that in, and then do Command V, and it just pasted it in without even asking us. Sometimes when you paste in, it will ask you a question about where do you want to, what column do you want to put them in? So for example, if I move, actually I don't know if it'll ask me or not. If I move the row order, notice the headers are still the same, but if I do Command X here and then Command V, now here, this is what I wanted to show you. So this viewer pops up again to check to make sure it's doing the right thing, because it noticed that the order of your columns were different. It checks the name of the headers, and it's just checking, do you actually want to not paste this in the same order as the data and be consistent in terms of the column headers? And that is absolutely what I would want to do. There's a number of actions here under this gear menu that will actually change. You can remove the connections, you can change the order if you want. You can also drag these. These are, actually I guess just so you can see, if the connections aren't shown at all, I can click on one side and then I can drag it and connect it to the right hand side to where I would want that data to be pasted. Or I can just say connect by column name here, and it will reconnect everything for me. So now when I import, there I go. I have my data in the appropriate format, and I'm showing everything appended as it should be. So that's sort of a handy example to see. The example that you see here, you're seeing both the actual structure of the data as they show it within the paper. And then again, on the right-hand side, we have the data that's being generated from a pivot command. So these are all the ones that I've created. Let me hide that. So the actual data is in this format where you have two different experiments. You have also a control value, and then you have this experiment, you have another experiment here, and then you have the mean and you have the standard deviation. And the point in the article is that you really need to be careful about showing the mean and standard deviation with the data. These are, again, using cell references to calculate the mean off of these cells. And the overall recommendation that they give is that you should actually never be doing calculations in spreadsheets, because the cell reference approach is so prone to error. And there's really no way from looking at this to know for sure, did you copy and paste these calculations, the cell entry correctly between each one of these to make sure that you're using all three columns. You would have to go into each one manually and check them to verify that in fact they're calculated correctly. So you really do want to do these calculations programmatically, and that's essentially what they're saying. And DataGraph allows you to do that. So what I did with this set of data is transformed it into the format that you see here, where again, this is a matter of highlighting the data, copying it, transposing it. In this case, I guess I didn't transpose it yet. This is just removing these extra columns that you don't need. But one really handy trick to show you is that there's some metadata here about this data that I want to keep, but really does not fit in this table format. So to remove this, I can just take this data and copy this and put this in a text block within my data column list here. So to create a text block, you would click on this icon here, a comment block, and then I could paste in the values that were in this table. So that's a handy way actually to, if you want to quickly move some data, you don't want to delete it, but it really doesn't belong in the data table itself, you can copy and paste it into a text block. And then that allows me then to just go in here and hit the delete key. Again, I'm going to delete only from this group. One thing that's also useful to realize is that you can also just move things around in the program. So here, for example, I don't really want that column there. I could just move that down. Again, it's going to ask me only in this group. And then I want to move these two rows potentially up to the top. Now, I don't actually necessarily have to do that. Again, in many ways, DataGraph will allow you to have spaces between your data so that you, again, only group, move this down. There we go. One of the things we've actually been talking about is having that be another thing where it remembers your selection so you don't have to do it multiple times. But in any case, this is just a matter of moving some things around. And I think based on what we've done already, you could see how I can get to the format that you see here. The next thing that we would do is to flatten this data set. So if I hide my original data, I can see the values that you see here. And then I'm going to bring it to this format. And the way, again, that I do that is I would click on these three columns. I would just want this data in my data table. And I would go to the data, flatten columns, and now I've gotten all my data again into a single column. All my values are together so I can run statistics on them. I can compare them graphically. What I also did in this version to the right, which is kind of my final version, is I also sorted the data by type. So that's something that we can also do. And if I say sort this, and I only want to sort the columns in the group that I'm in right now, then I can do that. So I can sort just this group of data. And then I could, again, add in spaces in between if I want, just to make this a little bit easier for me to view this data. I guess the rest of this is really, again, showing the ability to use the pivot commands to output this in this format that you would like to see. So I'll post this this file online so that you can see this in a bit more detail. But again, this is a matter of using these pivot commands, and because I'm not sure right now, okay, which group did I have this, is this coming from? I can go ahead and double click here to show where this is in my data table, and then I can go ahead and see where did this come from. So again, if you've never used this before in DataGraph, this is such a handy functionality. So when you go back to files that you created a little while ago and you want to try and understand, okay, I created this column, but where did I create this column? You know, now I have these nice groups that are organizing my sections, but I don't remember where this was. So I can click this gear menu, go to suppliers, and then it will show me a list of the commands that where this column came from, because you can see by the format of it, the fact that it's bold and it has that little dot here in the right, that this is a derived column. So I can go into here, did this now a couple of times, you see the green arrow showing you where it is. It's in this group. I can click on the number 4 here to show me all the different graphics that I created, and these are done in a variety of different ways. I have these pivot commands that are, again, these are being used to then extract out the values that you see here, showing the data in essentially the same format. I'm sorry, I'll just show you this, going from the tidy format to then a format that's maybe a little bit easier to view in almost exactly the same way. There's another summary option that I show here. This is where you would, oops, sorry about that, I meant to click this one, where you have the control separate from the experimental data. And the reason I did that is because the actual, the technique for getting this option that you see here is to create a column that actually combined the 2 different categorical variables. So I have, you notice this is control NA, experiment 1-A, experiment 1B. This is actually using a token field to create this label, which allows me to then use that in my pivot command and output the mean and standard error on the mean for these particular, for each one of these individually. Otherwise, you get every combination that's shown, and since control doesn't have an A or a B, you would end up seeing some blank spaces. So the token field is something that is, let's see, where do I have my, here it is. Okay, let me hide this. So this is the field that you see here. So this is a way to combine 2 text columns into one unique identifier for each one of these sample sets. If I wanted to, again, do a mean and a standard deviation over each one, this is one way to kind of force that. You don't necessarily want to use tokens like this if you have huge data sets. It's not necessarily the speediest technique in terms of working with data. But for a data set like this, it's perfectly fine. And it's a nice way to maintain these individual columns, but programmatically, again, create a unique identifier for each one of your data sets. The one that you see here, 5D, this is an interesting example, because here we have some data that is actually in columns where maybe you don't need to repeat it over and over again because it's the same for each one. And then that's sort of the question, well, if it's the same for each one, do you really need to have this all in the same table? I can do this technique of filling in the entry with the last entry. There's no problem doing that. But maybe that doesn't make a lot of sense. So the way that we could do this instead is to show two different groups. So I'd have one group that would show me just my IDs, and then I would have another group that would show all of the rest of the data. And to create this is pretty easy too. Again, using all the techniques that I've shown you so far. So if this is where I started, I could go ahead and, again, make a copy because I'm going to move things around. So now I have my copy that I'm going to work in. And I'm going to want to have these data sort of separated from each other. So the first thing that you'll notice is the ID column. That would be, let me actually go ahead and use the row for column titles. Click on this to delete from the group. Here's my ID column. And it's going to be in both of my tables. So it'll be in the small table that has just the date and the weight, and then it will be in my larger table that has that other information also. So this is, again, another option drag. I can just click my option key, drag the ID column. So now I have two of them. I need this to be a text to use that filling with the last entry. So I convert this to a text. Fill empty rows with previous non-empty row. Now I have my one data table that has my data here. And another one of the recommendations from the paper is to separate your notes from your actual data itself. So that's something we could do by adding a text column. I do this a lot where I have some kind of a note field that I add, and then you could just copy, move this text between the two. In any case, I won't go ahead and do that now. You can certainly see how that's done. But I would take this data and put it in its own group. So now I have my group with my data. And then the what you see here, which is going to be my groups with my IDs, all I need to do now is just remove all the empty rows. So I can right click, say select empty rows, hit the delete key. Again, this is going to pop up just to make sure you do what you intend to do. You're going to say only group, and now you have this smaller table. So the thing here that's really great is that now I have a much easier way to enter this information in terms of the date and the weights, and I have the ability to go ahead and map one to another. So notice how in each of these groups, I have the ID column here and the ID column here. They have the same names, and this is very handy for mapping data sets. DataGraph has this capability to connect data sets. You don't have to have things have the same names to connect, but the shortcuts that we have built in only work when you have the same IDs. So, or same column headers. So if I want to, for example, in my date table or my data, actually this should be data, in my data table, if I want this to contain the weight, maybe I need to use that in an expression or some kind of equation, then I can just right click on this column header and notice that there's an entry for map. DataGraph will automatically look for other groups and other places within your file that have the same column header. So here it actually shows up a couple of them because I've used this in different places. I want to use this group, the group that I have here, let's see if this, I think it was picking that one up. Oh, there we go. Yeah, we'll do again, the weight. So now what it's done is it's created this column that is mapped back to my short table, and it has those values there that can be used like any other column. So this is really, really convenient for doing calculations, and again, maintaining the integrity of my data. And here you can see there's a data set that has a bunch of data that actually in some ways is, you know, sort of nicely organized. You can see the IDs here. I guess I don't have the week shown here. So this is actually, this would be week 4, this would be the week 6, and this would be week 8, for example. But this is, again, what we're going to do is transpose this and get or transform this into the format that you see here using all these techniques that we've done already. And this is also going to use these appending type of techniques. So for the data, one of the things that I would do is I would want to have the week also be a column. So instead of being a header across the top, I can put a column in here that would have week 4. I actually made a number, but again, if I want this to be to fill this in the quick way, then I can make that a text. I can add it in the same thing here. So I'll go ahead and add in a number column. I can move this around if I want to put this in the right spot. And this would be week 6. And do the same, the last thing here. There's something kind of, oops. Oh, again, convert to text, fill empty rows. There we go. Okay, so I have one more to add. So now I can delete this row. I would do only from this group. I can go ahead and use this row for my column titles. And now what I want to do is basically another append kind of an action where I'm taking my week 4, week 6, and week 8, and I'm appending them to each other. So this is not too hard to do. I can take this, and I'm actually going to come over here and hide those 2 in the beginning. I can paste, again, gives me this interface. I import that. I can Command X, Command V. Now it remembers what I did last time. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting that I'll end with in pulling this together is that if you go to the figure, let's see what figure it is, figure 8 in the paper, when I moved this data around, I got sort of nervous that I did something inappropriate because I saw that the glucose numbers and the weight numbers were not right, that they didn't match the data in figure 8. But then if you look back at where this data comes from, in figure 7 is the original version of the data where, let's see, I guess I sort of moved this. I did move this kind of around, so you can see it hopefully on the paper itself, or in fact, maybe I can pull this in just so you can see. Here we go. So if we looked at where this data comes from, again, here's kind of the 2 versions of it, where this is where it came from, figure 7, and then here's the tidy version of that. And notice the glucose data here at 635, but if I look at the tidy version, the glucose and the weight data have been swapped. And I thought this was sort of ironic because this is again talking about moving the data around, and again the recommendation is to be very careful when you're moving data around. In particular, if you're moving it in spreadsheets, as was possibly done when they manipulated this data around, those column headers were transposed. But when I did this in DataGraph, I didn't do any manual blocking or copying of cells and pasting them in other locations. I did it all in a way that meant that the integrity of the data was maintained. And I hope that you kind of have got this message. Maybe this was one too many examples to do for one webinar, but the main idea is that that not only does DataGraph help to solve these problems just by the way the format of the program is and the way that we have set this up, but that you don't need to be scared of taking data that's in a format that's not working and putting it into a format that would be more appropriate to use. The files that you see here, I'll go ahead and share this one in particular. This has a number of different graphics that I created based on the tidier format of the data. And these, are not hard to do. This is a combination of pivoting and masking the data. And then this data set here also shown, again, the control data, experiment 1, experiment 2. These are individual box plots where each one has a mask in it according to the different data, and then it's grouped according to A and B. So this is a really handy way of viewing the data. Hopefully the questions kind of got answered on the discussion board. Thanks so much for all of you attending today, and we'll continue our having webinars on Friday. I'm not sure if we're going to do something necessarily next Friday, but definitely try out the new version. Let us know what you think. And we really do appreciate all the feedback that we get from people. It definitely helps us a lot to improve the program. And, every version that comes out, I always feel like it's such a nice improvement, and it's so much driven by the feedback that we get. So we'll continue to work at that, and definitely appreciate your comments right now that today's talk was helpful. I do apologize for going a bit long, but I really wanted to make sure I got through these examples to give you all of these ideas as to how you can manipulate data and use DataGraph not just for your final graphics, but really use it as your mechanism for storing your data within for your research itself. So thank you so much for the feedback. I do appreciate that. One of the things that I'm thinking about for the future is to really focus on using the program. I'm using the terminology data warehouse. I'm not actually sure if that's an entirely appropriate terminology, but the idea that you can really have an entire analysis and from beginning to end, and to use the program for that as a way of documenting it. One of the things I guess that struck me in reading this paper, that I'll just say as a final note before I do say goodbye, is that a lot of the data that you're probably seeing is actually data that is already calculated from some other series of calculations. My background is in chemistry, and when you have a number that's a concentration coming from some sample, then there's already a whole series of calculations and data that's been collected just to get that number. So thinking about going back to all the way to that stage where you're really looking at your raw data collection and trying to do it in the most robust manner possible. So thanks again for the feedback, and I hope everyone has a great weekend, and look forward to doing another webinar for you in the future.